And we're live. Okay, cool.
Yay.
Crush it.
Awesome. Thanks. See ya, Katie. And yeah, I'm waiting to see if it actually starts. I think she said we're live. It looks like it started. Cool. So there's a couple things different this week, as you might notice. First off, we are on a Zoom call. We had some technical difficulties and we're just getting started now. So yay. Teammates that help with workarounds. Second off, we have another co-host here this week, Jono. I'll do introductions right away. I'm sorry. And then third off, given that it is HashiConf Digital and Nomad 1.0 release and Halloween, I thought it would be fun to kind of do like a themed outfit today. So that covers all of the differences for this week. And with that, welcome to Nomad Community Office Hours. And as I said, today we've got one extra person. So Jono, do you want to start off introducing yourself and then we'll get to Chris and Schmeichel?
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. My name is Jono Sosolska. I'm a developer advocate here at HashiCorp. I love working on console, and how it integrates with Nomad has been a really great benefit for how we're deploying our applications. I'm really excited to join during this awesome week of the 1.0 launch.
I guess Chris next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Baker. I'm the lead engineer on the Nomad ecosystem team.
And hi, I'm Michael Schurter, or Schmeichel on GitHub or Twitter or anything, and I'm the Nomad team lead.
Awesome. And this week, you might have guessed the topic, but we're going to be talking about Nomad 1.0. So we have a couple questions we've got ready to start, but if you're here in chat, please feel free to submit your questions into chat. We'll be taking those in and looking at them and trying to answer them live. Well, not trying to, we will answer them live. Oh no, I've committed, but yeah, I guess I'm going to go with like my easy opening question and then I'll pass it to Jono. So I've already asked this a few times. I think I've already asked both of you this, but I'll start with Chris. What are you most excited for with 1.0 coming out?
Yeah, so if y'all saw the announcement yesterday with Armand, 1.0 had a big feature that we worked on in the ecosystem team, which was dynamic application sizing. So I'm obviously excited about that, partially because of the capabilities that it delivers today, but actually because some of the stuff that we're going to be able to do to build on top of that going forward is going to be really even better, even more powerful, even more fun. So I'm really excited about that, but I'm also pretty excited about event streams in the 1.0 release. I think it's going to make it easy for folks to build a lot of the external integrations that they're doing today with Nomad using things like blocking queries are going to be a lot more efficient, a lot more fun with event streams.
And what about you, Michael?
I think, I mean, obviously what Chris already said, but one thing that I'd love to highlight about the 1.0 release that doesn't get much attention is we've also put a ton of extra effort into our existing E2E test suite. So our end-to-end test suite has gotten a lot of improvements and attention. And it's one of those things that, nobody ever really notices if you're a Nomad user, but hopefully has a huge impact on our reliability and not just reliability going forward, but also just on our ability to iterate. So we can iterate and know that we're not causing regressions, iterate and be able to test things in a more realistic way than just a unit test. So it's really exciting to see these sorts of behind the scenes infrastructure improvements happening with Nomad as well.
Awesome. So one of the questions that I personally had, being that I work on console, I interact with Nomad kind of tangentially. Our ecosystems are growing day by day. What are some projects that you want to highlight in the ecosystem that other people can kind of contribute to if they maybe are a little bit intimidated by the core code base?
So yeah, that's a great question. I think that the two things that happen to my mind immediately are one, our task drivers have been a very popular place for the community to contribute code. And if you're not familiar with our task driver plugins, tasks are Nomad's smallest unit of work. They're a container or a process, or they're your service that Nomad is running for you. And every task has a driver. And so that might be Docker, that might be Firecracker is a community plugin. Podman is a plugin that we actually got started by the community. Now we officially kind of brought in support. And so those are a great way to kind of contribute. And the API you have to implement a new task driver isn't very big. There's a skeleton GitHub project that you could just clone and get to work on and kind of fill in the blanks. So it's pretty fun and easy to iterate on. But that being said, like most projects, to actually get something from a toy to production ready is a lot of work and a lot of testing. So it would be great to see the community really rally around some of these new and exciting task drivers like Firecracker and Podman and kind of get them production ready. Yeah, I think the other one, if I could sneak in one other community project, an ecosystem project, is Nomad Firehose. Is a super popular project. We always hear tons of people using it. And now we're building the event stream, which if you're not familiar with Nomad Firehoses, it kind of synthesized an event stream from existing Nomad APIs. But because Nomad really didn't have a first-class event stream, there was only so much it could do in certain situations. And so it might miss updates. And there's nothing that Firehose could do about it because Nomad just did not provide the APIs for it to get every single update. So we're really hoping that event stream, allows for a lot more powerful capabilities to be built on top of things like Firehose. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether we can port Firehose to event stream or whether event stream replaces Firehose. And that's something that we'd love to kind of work with the community to figure out.
Yeah, so for ecosystem, we have a number of projects similar to Nomad that are plugin based. And so the Nomad Autoscaler, for example, has plugins for application performance monitoring, things like Prometheus. And in fact, the support that we have in the Autoscaler for Datadog was contributed by a community member. Similarly, the support for horizontal cluster scaling for Azure scaling groups was just recently added by a community member as well. So not only do we appreciate like all the work that goes into those types of plugins, but just all the knowledge, the operational knowledge, like this was contributed by somebody who uses Datadog. The other one was contributed by somebody who uses Azure. So if you came to me and said, hey, I want support for Azure scaling groups in there, I'd have to go figure out how they work. I'd have to figure out how you want to use them. I'd have to figure this out. These community contributions in terms of the operational knowledge that they emerge from makes them at least as valuable from that regard as the actual code that is contributed. So it's also super valuable to us when people send in these community contributions. We know it's things that they care about, and we know it means that they care about Nomad and using Nomad and extending Nomad. So there's nothing better in the world than a community PR.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely second that. It's great to be able to see, because I know for me personally, I have the use cases I come across as an operator or as an SRE, but there are other times where you see something that's designed and implemented and it makes you wonder like, oh, that's a use case I've never seen. It really kind of challenges those perceptions. Thanks for giving a really great entry point for how people can start to contribute. If people want to reach out to try and field ideas before necessarily putting in the work, what's the easiest way to do that?
Probably a GitHub issue. Some of these things have a GitHub issue, a GitHub issue already. But yeah, if you just go to the appropriate project, the autoscaler, the Terraform provider, Nomad itself, and just file an issue and say, hey, this is an enhancement request I'd like to do. Or that I think somebody should do. Is this already out there? Is anybody already thinking about this? Is there already an open issue talking about this? And then from there, it's a wonderful place to go ahead and have a discussion about how it might be implemented.
Awesome. So the first question we had come in today was, what are the use cases that we had in mind when designing the event stream?
Oh, that's a great question. Because the event stream is kind of the Swiss Army knife. I think for anybody who has used Nomad Firehose or similar systems, how powerful they are and kind of how, but not only that, kind of how open-ended they are. They're just a stream of events. By itself, it doesn't really unlock any new functionality. It's what you build on top of it. So to actually get into some concrete use cases that we thought of, one of the most basic that we'd love to build into Nomad itself to kind of highlight this feature is just the ability to watch the events related to specific objects. So maybe you ran a job and you can look at the job status, you can look at the allocation status, but maybe you want to see every little change that's happening. Maybe the deployment isn't going well and you're not exactly sure why. You can't notice in those different status pages exactly what's going on. So to just have a CLI command or a UI page that you can go to and see all the events related to that particular job or that particular deployment should give people a much quicker way to get to, you know, the root cause of what's ever going on than having to read page after page of these status pages and kind of having to hop between them. So we're hoping that it's an operational tool for users on that one side. And then kind of on the other side is we're hoping that it really unlocks some automation use cases. And so like Kubernetes has this whole operator API and ecosystem where you can write jobs that orchestrate and instrument other jobs. And Nomad has never really had any sort of first-class support for that. Obviously, you can hit the Nomad API and react to things that happen in that. But like I was talking about before, that's tricky to implement right. It's impossible to do in a way that you get every single event. And so we're really hoping that this event stream allows people to write things like operators, where you can actually respond to things that are happening in your cluster. Like maybe you have a service that if it loses an allocation, Nomad will reschedule it, but maybe there's some rebalancing operation that needs to happen and that needs to be triggered by your code. The event stream API would be a great thing for you to ingest, look for that reschedule event, and then kick off this manual rebalancing process. So yeah, we hope it covers a lot of use cases. And like Chris said, GitHub issues. We love GitHub issues for ideas, problems, whatever could help people solve their problems better. We want to hear it.
Awesome. So I have a follow-up question on that. Are there any plans to implement conditional operators into HCL? An example of this is when I deploy an app, I want to run a different command based on the operating system of the node, maybe a shell script versus a bash script or a batch script based off of Windows IIS systems.
Yeah, that's a really great use case. Please file an issue for that because I think that definitely deserves some discussion. To be honest, we were trying to be pretty conservative about our initial HCL2 features. HCL2 is super exciting. It should unlock a lot of possibilities, but we really highly value backward compatibility. And so we're really trying to only initially offer the features of HCL2 that we're completely confident that we're offering in the right way and that we want to support these forever. You know, we're not going to offer something and then be like, oh, you know what, that function name didn't make sense, so we're going to take it away and break everybody's job who touches. Like, no. We want to make sure we're getting this right and get it right the first time. So definitely, yeah, you can flood us with little feature requests around HCL2, and I think that would really help us get it to the most useful place.
There we go. I was like, where'd my unmute go? Thanks for that. So the next question we had come in is there any plan to implement conditional operators into HCL? For example, when I deploy an app, I wish to run a different command based on the node OS. So
we got that one while
oh,
you were
did you?
Zoom.
Oh,
Yes.
I didn't realize that was the, sorry, when you said follow-up question, I thought it was a different question. I am so sorry. I was like, this sounds familiar, but maybe it's different. It was not different. Oops. All right. What's our next question then? The next question was, what are the plans for improving Nomad integration with Waypoint?
That's a good question. I mean, the plan is to improve Nomad integration with Waypoint.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chris, I don't know if you have any more details about it, but I think people who have been around HashiCorp products for a while might be kind of used to how HashiCorp does things, which is we don't always release complete cross-product support for features, on day one. So like this has happened over and over again with console, where like console launched with console namespaces, and Nomad did not have console namespace support on day one of that release. Thank you to the community who actually contributed some console namespace support to Nomad, and we're hoping to improve that in the future, by the way. That was fantastic. But the reason HashiCorp doesn't do that is because that would kind of force all of our products to work in this lockstep fashion. And not only does that kind of have that head of line blocking problem of you can only move as fast as the slowest project, but it also kind of implicitly creates this tight coupling between the design of projects that we explicitly try to avoid. We try to do the whole Unix philosophy of each of our products should be able to stand by themselves on their own and be useful that way. If we're moving in a lockstep fashion, it becomes hard to avoid these deep sort of integrations and making decisions purely based on what our own other products need. So, yeah, I mean, the other side of this is like, yeah, we would always love to ship perfect support for every HashiCorp new feature the day that it ships. Like, it's frustrating for us internally to kind of work in this asynchronous way. But I think at the end of the day, it has a lot of benefits.
And if you look at something like, for example, the Nomad Vault integration, right? We wanted it to be, and Mitchell talked about this and Armand talked about that. So we wanted it to be as easy as possible in the Nomad job spec. That's what that integration is. It's taking something that we want to be pretty straightforward and simple in the Nomad job spec and turn it into all of the orchestration that happens on the back end in Nomad to implement best practices around the type of workflows that our users have, right? And one of the problems with that is sometimes you have to wait a little while and see how it is that people actually want to use this. And as you can imagine, Waypoint is new, and it's going to be changing. People are going to be learning about it. They're going to be figuring out how they want to use it. The product's going to be evolving to reflect that. And then we'll see as we go forward where it makes sense to find beautiful workflows in Waypoint to call out to Nomad.
Awesome. Yeah. And as with everything, there's a lot of excitement when a new product gets released. Say like, yeah, this is awesome. We want it. Our imagination runs wild. But it takes time to implement the thing that we're imagining. Well, I kind of look at it as like drawing a picture. When you get an idea to draw a picture, you furiously work at it. And then over time, you're like, wait, I want to change aspects of this, or this isn't what I was actually thinking. And getting that feedback earlier from the community of like, this is what I'm thinking in terms of how to use these integrations or where things touch, is a picture that's always evolving and always growing. To which I have a question on the picture around Nomad and Console Connect. So is it possible to use Nomad with Console Connect to replace something like Trafic or Fabio for routing to HTTP services?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we talk about a lot internally because it's kind of a mixed story today. So Nomad's Console Connect integration today is I'm a little biased maybe, but amazing for your internal service communication. So when service A needs to talk to service B internally with your Nomad cluster, I think the Console Connect integration makes that really easy. Then there's Console's Ingress gateways that makes it easy to kind of incrementally move to a Connect service mesh world within your Nomad cluster, because it would allow you to run some services outside of Connect, some services inside of it, and the Ingress gateway kind of connects them. Now, kind of the missing piece of the puzzle here is the ingress from the public internet. At some point, you need to actually accept traffic from the public internet. There was a lot of discussion when we were integrating Console's Ingress gateways as to whether or not that's the thing, to put on the public internet. And for a number of reasons, we kind of decided not to encourage that. But and that's mainly because there's all kinds of concerns around accepting traffic from the public internet that projects like Trafic support extremely well. TLS certificates, is probably a great one. Managing those, implementing the Acme protocol, maybe all that sort of fun stuff. And so we don't want to try to reinvent wheels that are already really well invented. And so definitely we want to rely upon these projects like Trafic that support that public internet ingress use case really well. And then it can feed into an ingress gateway, connect to the rest of your cluster, or directly to a Nomad service that exposes a port to it that's not part of the service mesh. We're still looking to improve this story because there's, as you can tell, a lot of kind of moving pieces required. I think we nailed the flexibility aspect, but that just means that it requires a lot of work on the operator side to kind of make sure they've hooked up everything in this pipeline correctly, in this ingress pipeline correctly. So we're definitely exploring first-class ingress support in Nomad of some kind. And yeah, definitely expect to see news on that in next year. And feedback always welcome as far as what people are experiencing, what they'd like to see, and that sort of thing.
Perfect. Sorry, there's a lot of chat going on today, and I'm trying to moderate and bring things in. So, let's see. There's a lot of questions coming in, which is nice, but there's always room for more. So if you're watching and you still have more questions, please ask away. We've got time. I think the next question we had was, what is the level of isolation that's provided by namespaces?
Yeah, so Nomad namespaces provide job level isolation. Nomad namespaces do not implement any sort of node level isolation. That's probably the first important distinction for people to understand. So jobs from multiple namespaces can be co-located on a single node. And the reason for that is that the task drivers that you use should be providing the level of task isolation required for security. And so being able to co-locate workloads on a single node is the best for bin packing, best for your budget, all that sort of fun stuff. So we focus namespaces purely on namespacing jobs, so you can have different teams operating within their own logical kind of cluster, but then sharing compute resources underneath. Yeah, I think that kind of covers the isolation provided by namespaces. I think the one other thing I would say about that is I'm excited about namespaces being open source now because it kind of gives us more opportunity to extend them based on community feedback. We can, make more of our open source features namespace aware in interesting ways that we really couldn't before if namespaces were just locked away in the enterprise. We always had to make sure, okay, we can only add things to namespaces that are only, usable in enterprise anyway. So yeah, I'm hoping that we're able to do some more interesting things with namespaces now that they're open source and now that we can kind of play around with them more easily.
Awesome. And it's really interesting to point out that the most granular level of security is at that task driver level, which goes to our previous point. Like, that's where we would appreciate more contributions, because at the task drivers, that enables us to do that really fine-grained permission and still make things secure and easy to use at the same time. So one of the questions that I got here and has kept me smiling for a minute is, I don't have green hair. Should I use Nomad? I'm going to tell you right now, the reason I have green hair is because I started playing with Nomad and I started to enjoy it so much that I just have to represent. Like, it is that enjoyable to use. And so personal thank you to Chris and Michael and the team for contributing towards that. If that's not a better chance to keep green hair on, then I don't know what is. Jackie, I did see a couple of questions come in around the Nomad provider. Can you field those for us real quick?
Yeah, there's been some conversation going around in chat around the provider as well. I've seen Louise sharing links, or trying to. I've shared some links on behalf of Louise as he's putting in answers. I think Charlie's been putting some answers in too. One of the questions we got was that so far they're finding the Nomad provider is limited, and they're wondering if we've gained any new treats. Oh my God, treats. I just tried to say tricks or treats in the same, it's Halloween. Anyway, has it gained any new tricks with regards to managing tasks? And just before we get, sorry.
This is the Nomad Terraform provider.
I think so, yeah. We've been talking about that in chat, so I think it was like a follow-up to that. And then just before we go into the answer, also, I got a request that if you're asking these kinds of questions and there's something particular that you're looking for better support around, please, please, please let us know, because we'd love to get clarification around what kind of task management problems or things you think are missing that we should add in. It's a lot easier if you tell us, and then we can kind of count that in. But yeah, sorry, I'll say the question again, because I just kind of, the provider, has it gained any new tricks regarding managing tasks?
Not any new tricks specifically. So, you know, well, first, the Nomad Terraform provider is open source. And so it's another one of these ecosystem projects. It's probably one of the easiest ones to contribute to, because coming in and adding a new resource or a new data source to a Terraform provider is actually, it can be pretty straightforward. Most of these are pretty much boilerplate copies of the other inside of Nomad. So a new data source to get allocations, a new data source to get policies, that sort of stuff. So if there's something that it doesn't do that you'd like it to do, please file an issue, or, you know, take a crack at it. Having said that, there are things that Nomad in Terraform is sort of controversial. We want to support all the capabilities of Nomad via the Terraform provider so that people can do what they need to do. But, you know, Terraform's a provisioning tool. Nomad is orchestration. It's, you know, a lot of the use cases that people currently use Terraform and Nomad for, use Nomad via Terraform for, might be better off using something like Waypoint, for example. So it's more of a tool oriented towards deployments and that sort of stuff, as opposed to Terraform, which isn't necessarily looking once you know, type Terraform apply and walk away from your laptop. But having said that, we're continuing to try to evolve the capabilities there. We're trying to put in we're in the process right now of adding a new resource for Nomad jobs, sort of the V2 version of the Nomad job resource, to tackle some of the difficulties that we've had with the existing one because of the way it's written and because of some of the limitations in earlier versions of Terraform. So it's going to continue to grow there. We're committed to it. We try to keep it up to date. We're going to be actually releasing a beta version of it with all the support for the 1.0 features either today or tomorrow. Now that the features are public and we can work on them in public. But yeah.
Awesome. It's great to hear about these improvements that are coming through and contributing to the provider as well to make it a lot easier. I did see a question here that's a really interesting one about Nomad and console together. I set up Ingress using HA proxy and console template, and the only missing part, I think, is to get routing config. That's possible. Routing config. Is that possible with connect config from the template? This is a kind of multi-layered approach to it. So let's start from the bottom. Using HA proxy and console template, getting these things running and the routing set up. How do we do this? What's the best way to approach this?
Is this a question about routing the traffic to the HA proxy instances? Okay. So yeah, from some other load balancer, some hardware load balancer or cloud native load balancer, presumably. Yeah, if that's the question, the way folks typically do that is they'll run it on a static port, which in general you don't want to do static ports. But if you look at the way we document this in the Learn guide and the way most people do it, and the way it's done actually with Kubernetes and the software load balancers and the way they interact with the cloud load balancers, the typical way is to break that rule, make a special exception for things, and use a static port that your cloud or hardware load balancer can look for, and then it knows which nodes the HA proxy is running on. However, you know, an operator which consumed event streams and updated this sort of stuff dynamically to make sure things were routed in the right way is one of these things that's now on the horizon now that we have an event stream API that makes these easier to do.
All right. Well, to follow up on that, for the individual who asked the question, please keep in mind there's also the console template repo. You can feel free to open up an issue there. and describe your use case in a little bit more detail, and we can see what else we can do to help make that workflow a little bit more clear.
Yeah, and I think as well, I'm not sure if this is the direction they were kind of heading in, but one thing that we are discussing heavily on Nomad is what first-class ingress and route support would look like within Nomad. Like, is there an opportunity for us to have an ingress or a route stanza within your job spec that then Nomad, somehow knows to hand off to AJ proxy or to console or to your cloud load balancers to actually translate that into the routing rules? That vague idea is about as far as we've gotten. So community feedback would be really interesting around this. Hearing, what your pain points are, and especially hearing where your pain points aren't. I think for a lot of people, ELBs, cloud load balancers are great and serve a lot of purposes. And so whatever we build shouldn't try to circumvent them or take over from them. What we build, wants to take full advantage of them. And so really connecting these two things, the whether it's HA proxy, whether it's a cloud load balancer, but getting from there to your service mesh in there is still something we definitely want to make a smoother experience. And yeah, brainstorming is welcome, very welcome.
Okay. The next question we had, let's see, I think it might have been related to what we just answered as well, because I think we talked Ingress here. But the next question we had was, do we have any plans to adopt something like Fabio?
Yeah, again, no, in the sense that I think we'll want to solve Ingress more generically. Because right now we have such flexibility around what people want to use in the Ingress place. And so the problem really is, too much flexibility. We probably need to be a little more prescriptive, or we at least need to add an integration point into Nomad where we could keep, this nice job spec definition of a service and kind of extend the metadata it has to offer with routes or Ingress that, we then hand off to console or Fabio or whatever. So I doubt that would see us treating something like Fabio like we treat console today, where we have, a very specific, product specific integration. But yeah, I don't know. It's very early days with this idea. So we're still trying to keep an open mind.
All right. So earlier we had talked a little bit about event streams, and I'm gonna ELI5 here. Can you talk to me about what event streaming is? And then to one of our questions that came in, what are the use cases around event streaming aside from just, hey, I have this stream of logs?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially because Nomad, I think a lot like Kubernetes and probably other systems, has a lot of different streams of activity. I'm trying to think of like other words than event to use. But like Nomad has always had logging, and we support structured logging. That's kind of an event stream. Nomad Enterprise has audit logging. That's kind of an event stream. But this event stream that we're adding has a kind of a very specific and fairly narrow meaning that's kind of rooted in its core design decision. And that is the events are generated based off of Raft messages. If you're not familiar with Raft and how it's used in Nomad, Raft is a consensus protocol. And so you have something like 3 or 5 or 7 Nomad servers. Every time there is any change in state to your cluster, whether it's a node crashing, whether it's a job being deployed, anything like that, a Raft message is sent between all of the servers to make sure that they see the same view of the cluster. They all agree, yes, that node crashed, or yes, that deployment succeeded. So why this is important for event stream is our event stream hooks directly into that Raft consensus protocol. And it's not an exact one-to-one, Raft message to event stream message, but it's pretty close. And you actually can reference the event stream by Raft index. And so every single little message, every single little state change within your Nomad cluster gets a number assigned to it, a monotonically increasing index. And so you can actually start the event stream from index 100 or index 1000. And that's the same index as the modify index or the create index that you might notice on the job object or allocation object, or a lot of our API objects that will return to you. So, okay, sorry, I kind of got off into the weeds and implementation details a little bit, but I think it's really important to understand that basing the event stream off of the Raft consensus protocol means that it is a full view of cluster state. It is in a sense the same amount of information for whatever code you want to write against it as the Nomad scheduler itself has when making decisions about how to schedule things, when to reschedule things, you know, all of those sorts of behaviors. So yeah, it should be you know, fairly infinitely flexible tool for whatever you want to do with these events. But yeah, and that's why we're kind of hoping to also build some good concrete example use cases, like being able to monitor anything related to a job and just kind of know what's happening with that job, to kind of give people an idea of the power of this sort of system. Did that answer the question? I feel like I went really deep in the weeds there. I'm not sure if I actually answered the question directly.
Well, let me see if I can explain it back, and you can tell me if I've got it wrong or right here. So Nomad has Raft, which is basically keeping track of the state of Nomad, and whenever there is a change in the state, a message is sent out. This new event streaming platform will give you consistent access to those changes in the state of your Nomad cluster. Does that sound about right?
Yep, exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
And, you know, I think this is also really important because, to your point, it's a very specific set of features or when it was originally designed. But now that we're giving a more complete view to the changes of state in Nomad, there's more possibilities of like, okay, what can we do with this information? There's auto scaling to start, but then you can also do things like failovers or more resilience in terms of making this a more flexible, dynamic system. Because we tend to think of things kind of static, but as we move to clouds, they're more dynamic. This gives you dynamic and in order of what's happening in your entire cluster.
Yeah, exactly. That ordering aspect is pretty huge too. It's not only ordered events, but it's consistently ordered. So you can restart the stream kind of at any time and get the same order of events. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I really hope to see people do operator API sorts of tasks with it. Like a lot of database systems, distributed database systems will have, you know, their kind of own notions of cluster membership and that sort of thing. And they don't always integrate well with, you know, what Console or Nomad think of as cluster membership. Things like Cassandra or MongoDB, or even just replication in an RDBMS like MySQL or Postgres. And so those systems don't naturally or intrinsically react well to things like Nomad just restarting new instances for you automatically. You know, usually there's some operation you need to perform, like, oh, make sure an IP address is updated for some member, or make sure that maybe in the case of Cassandra, the node, the ring is rebalanced. Sorry, it's been a few years now since I've operated Cassandra. But at any rate, you know, this event stream should be the way to kind of perform those sorts of operations to make it so you can run these more sophisticated distributed systems within Nomad just completely safely and in an automated fashion, even in the face of, you know, node loss.
So we've been lots of chat on the Terraform provider. So the other question I asked earlier about if we had any new tricks regarding it, had some follow-ups. So Luis shared a work in progress PR. And then we got a follow-up question around that. That was the Nomad Terraform provider PR appears stalled. So who's maintaining that repo? And is it the Nomad team or the Terraform team? And Luis gave a short answer in Slack saying that the work is still happening. It's just a big undertaking to represent the entire Nomad job spec as Terraform entities. and suggested that Chris could talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so what the new V2 version of the Nomad job resource is if you've used the Nomad Terraform provider, there was the idea that it would we didn't want to have to update the schema every single time that we added new stuff to Nomad. So what we allowed you to do is specify the job file, the job spec, as just a string. And so you just take your whole job spec, you turn it into a HCL string of HCL, and then you put that in that one field. It's the job spec. Nomad job, my job spec equals big string. Now this didn't work because when you have the big HCL string, you still have to parse that. And parsing it requires knowing what a Nomad job looks like. And that changes with every version of Nomad. So it didn't really accomplish the goal that we were setting out to accomplish. I'll say we in this sort of universal all Nomad Terraform HashiCorp people ever. But in addition to that, it made life very difficult because it's one string that represents everything. And if you want to get anything else out of that job, like what was the name? Well, it's somewhere in the string. You should know. Just go look in the string. But no, if you want to say job.name, you have to have a field on it called name. So it has to be a computed field that came out of the string. If you want to look at the task groups, well, that's another computed field that came out of the string. And you open this situation where you have really one input and it's this monolithic string and everything else is a computed field. And life is sort of hard with these computed fields, especially since some of them you don't really want them to be computed. You want to be able to update the namespace without updating this string. Well, it wasn't really possible to break some of these things out. So what we did is we decided we'd make a new version, a new Nomad resource that would do jobs in sort of a Terraform native way and a sort of Nomad fluent way, right? So we have for every single field in the Nomad job spec, we have a field inside of one of these resources. The Nomad job spec schema is represented in this Terraform schema. A lot of work, a ton of work. If you go look at that PR, it's almost all of it's the schema, but it's gigantic. A massive undertaking by Remy, who is implementing that for us. And he sent us a PR. There's a couple of things that need to be done, but we were so busy working on the release that we haven't had a chance to approve it yet. So we're going to be looking at, that's actually one of the things we have at the top of our list for next week. Let's go ahead and get that, test it, play with it a little bit, see if it's in a good enough place to go ahead and release and put out there in the wild for folks to use. So that's sort of the long answer to that short question. Was there a second part of that question? Were there two questions there? Oh yeah, well the other question is that the Nomad Terraform provider is owned by Nomad Ecosystem. So we take care of mediating all of the, shepherding all of the PRs that come through, looking at issues, dealing with issues that are, urgent, need to be taken care of, updating that Terraform provider with every release of Nomad to support all the new things that are in Nomad. So updating the parsing of that HCL string. So that's on us. We do that. If you have something you want done with it, file an issue. But we have a whole channel in Slack where all of us sit around and talk. Jackie's worked on the Nomad Terraform provider when she was embedded with the Nomad team for a month. So it is under development, but we have a lot of projects in Nomad ecosystem, and the Terraform provider is just one of them.
It's funny when you were talking about the file and kind of getting those computed. Oh my God, I can't talk today. But the computational resources and maybe not always wanting them to be that. I was like, oh, this sounds like that time we accidentally tried to tackle issue number 1.
Yeah, we had an issue on the GitHub tracker. It was like somebody wanted the ability to set the namespace in the resource instead of having to update it in that big string. And I said, oh, it's easy. You just add a new field, say it's computed, but it also can be set. And it's a good first issue, and handed it to Jackie when she was embedded with Nomad. And we sat down one day to pair programming. About 8 o'clock on that Friday night, we decided maybe it wasn't a good first issue and removed the label. And sometime on Monday, we decided that not only was it hard, it was actually impossible. You couldn't do it with the Terraform SDK. You couldn't make it a computed field that you could also use. Now, the good news is that there's a new SDK that Terraform is coming out with that allows you to do exactly what it is we were trying to do that day. So we're looking forward to using that in the future. but yeah, the way that the Nomad job resource is implemented makes some things very difficult, and just also some of the nature of Nomad via Terraform, and the Kubernetes. The people who work on the Kubernetes Terraform provider will tell you the exact same thing. It's very difficult doing some of these things in a way that makes sense.
Awesome. And a shout out to all of the folks who are on the Terraform provider team, and a thank you to Remy as well too. He's done work on the console Terraform provider.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of contributions are really valuable, because there is so much growth that happens organically on the products and organically in Terraform. Trying to marry that synergy together can take some time, but we do want to do that. So anywhere we can get the help is always appreciated. That does bring up me to the next question, which is, are there other templating routes that are being considered aside from just Go templating right now?
Yeah, so to be clear, because we use templating in a few different contexts, Go templating is something our CLI tool provides for templating the output of CLI commands. And it's not supported by every command, sorry, but most of our commands you can specify a custom Go template for, and it'll spit out, only the information you ask for and in the format you want it. So in that context, are we looking at supporting other templating languages? Probably not. It's not that we love Go template. Please don't interpret it that way. Go template is fine. There are definitely other templating. We all have our favorite templating language, I'm sure. Let's leave that aside for now. Things like Jinja especially have become, almost a standard too. So it's kind of a shame that's not what we went with initially. The reason we'll probably just stick with Go templating is because we don't even have perfect coverage with that. First, we'll probably want to extend that to make sure we do have full coverage. But we also want to extend, there's a -JSON flag on almost all, and hopefully someday all of our commands, to get the JSON representation of that command's output. Once you have a JSON representation, then you can feed that to all kinds of custom tooling to do whatever you want to do with. So I think we want to get those two representations right and comprehensive before we go, extending things further. I'm not saying it won't ever happen, but but yeah, we definitely want to get right what we already have before we go adding more stuff that, then we would want to support forever.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So the next question we had come in is two parts. So the first part was, is there a tool that will write a Nomad HCL file from JSON? So I followed up asking if they were looking for a one-time use case or a multiple use case, like are all of your jobs written in JSON and that's the intention? And the follow-up part to that question was, we have a tool that's hard-coded to read and write HCL files, and I want to turn the JSON I construct in Python to an HCL file so that the tool can consume it as normal. So multiple uses.
This actually comes up a lot with ecosystem because of the auto scaling. So the auto scaler is looking at your Nomad job, and it's going to change the task group count, or it's going to change, if you're using dynamic application sizing, it's going to change the resource settings. But it's doing that, talking to Nomad, and a number of folks want the HCL. Now, Nomad doesn't have the HCL for your job, and the autoscaler communicates with Nomad over the JSON API. It doesn't have the HCL either. So there are folks who know that, there's this process out there that's mutating the job, and they want to know at any given point in time what the actual HCL is, so that they can maybe update it in their version control or something like that. So the first issue is to try to break some of these patterns. Some of these are probably an anti-pattern, we need to be able to give people a way, and it's not an anti-pattern that they're doing something wrong. It's an anti-pattern that we've sort of put them in a position where they have to do something wrong. You shouldn't have to update your HCL so that you can make changes to your job with Nomad. We should give you the ability to make the changes that you want to make while also acknowledging the other changes have been made by the auto scaler or the application size or something like that. So we're working on those workflows. We're working on having support for those workflows so that people don't have to update their tooling to make Nomad do what they want it to do. But the other thing is just the idea that there isn't a canonical, necessarily a canonical HCL that you can. I mean, we can programmatically come up with one that'll be consistent, but you can turn the JSON back into HCL, and it's something that has come up a number of times. We were just talking about it this morning in the ecosystem team because of some requests around this. And I don't know, Schmeichel, can we get that in this? The CLI could do it. The server doesn't have to.
Oh, this is a great question, and one that not only do we talk about a lot, but it constantly surprises even Nomad engineers. The fact that the Nomad agent, the daemon that's running whether it's server or client, doesn't handle HCL. By the time your job makes it to Nomad, except for the validate endpoint, I think, or the parse endpoint, I forget, except for like one endpoint, the Nomad really only ever works with the JSON representation of a job. We throw away the HCL almost immediately. And this causes fairly consistent little pain points. And especially with our HCL2 integration, it becomes really interesting because HCL2 has all of these, kind of exciting features over HCL1. But the problem is, if the Nomad agents don't know HCL, we can't really use any of those features once your job gets to the agents. Those features can only be used as kind of a pre-processing step. And that's useful for a lot of things. We recently made Levant an official, HashiCorp product. Levant is great at templating job files. Now with HCL2, you should have even more options for kind of this pre-submit processing of job files. But yeah, until Nomad really stores and uses the HCL directly, there's a lot that it can't do to kind of, interpolate, process, evaluate HCL at runtime. So we'll see. The scary thing with doing that is it just complicates everything. For anyone who has ever fought with Nomad's variable interpolation, you have some idea of kind of my concern in this area, because we do variable interpolation in your job spec in multiple places. The server does some when scheduling your job, but not all of it, because the server doesn't know all of it. Then once the job makes it to the client, it interpolates a few more variables because it knows a little bit more of the context involved. And then finally, once your console services are registered, at that point, once the job is started, but before console services are registered, we can interpolate all of your variables. And it's just really difficult to reason about, really difficult to debug sort of pipeline, because it's hard to say when a specific variable is interpolated, and we don't want to make that problem worse. That's a really, really ugly problem for people to deal with. It's hard to build tools around. So sorry, again, getting deep in the weeds on all of this stuff. But hopefully that gives people a lot of context for kind of what we're dealing with in our thought process.
That makes sense. I love your answers because there's always like so many things. I'm just like, oh, I don't even know which part I want to go look into first. But,
I mean, it's kind of a joke internally that we always say, there's no easy problems left in Nomad. It's like people are like, oh, can we just quick add this flag to this command line option? It's like, yeah, but is it consistent with these other command line options? It doesn't do that. Yeah. So anyway, there's always a lot to consider.
Did you see the command line flag question coming up? Because there is
no,
one.
I didn't.
Okay, that's great. And also just a note on the templating side. There is a Learn guide. I think it's out. Yeah, it's out. Called Format Output with Templates that I'm going to link in chat that we have that also will kind of go through templating for you. So yeah, that's my only follow-up. So Jono.
Yeah, so this next question's a good one. As non-root, assuming I'm running the Nomad agent as root, wouldn't it be easy to support dropping the privileges to go non-root? They're kind of, Michael, to your point, there's no real easy answer to this one, but maybe we can find out about how we can make this easier.
So there is a user parameter in job specs. So if Nomad agent is running as root, and if you have raw exec task driver enabled, which it's disabled by default for security reasons, but if you do have it enabled, then in your job spec, you can set the user to whatever user you want. Now, you need to make sure that that user is configured on all of your target systems for that job. And so that's a little bit of an annoying thing to ensure. But yeah, we should support that just fine today with the user parameter. If you go to the job spec docs on nomadproject.io, you'll be able to find that. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to follow up. So that's user permissions, but what about groups as well too?
Oh, great question. Yeah, because I don't think we have that.
Yeah, there's an open issue about that.
Yeah.
Just watch issue 5397.
Perfect.
But yeah, that's something we should be able to do. There's really, I don't think there's any technical reason not to, but it is sort of a funny use case. Raw exec is like Schmeichel said, it's turned off by default. I think it's only the Mac users, the only people who use it because we don't have exec, because we don't have containers, Linux containers, C group. So user's good. I use it for testing sometimes. Group is something we should probably add support for.
So the next question is, what continued investments are we making for the remote task drivers in Nomad? Ooh, Schmeichel's excited.
That is Chris and I's favorite subject. It's actually something both Chris and I have independently done kind of sprints or spikes or implementations of. So to add a little bit of context around remote task drivers, and what I'm assuming the question is about is, like in the Kubernetes world, Kubernetes has this idea of virtual kubelets, where you are able to schedule workloads on something that is not necessarily a logical virtual machine or node or server. You can schedule workloads on maybe Fargate or ECS or Lambda, or name your favorite kind of cloud runtime here.
Or Nomad.
Oh, yeah. Wow. You can really, and Chris, don't distract me. So remote task drivers in Nomad will kind of fit the same use case, is allow you to schedule workloads within Nomad that are running remotely from a machine that's actually running Nomad itself. So instead of scheduling a workload on a virtual machine or a bare metal box that has a Nomad agent on it, you'd be scheduling a task on Fargate, ECS, or somewhere externally. So like I said, we've done a couple spikes about this. The two general approaches that we've taken is one, the virtual kubelet route, where effectively we virtualize this notion of the Nomad client. So it's more flexible than just a daemon running on a box, and it's something that we can record the resources of this virtual, whether like it's a Fargate pool of resources, we can schedule, across that directly. Or we have like a little shim service that acts as the virtual client for those resources. So that's kind of one approach. And then the other approach would be just a remote task driver, where we still require you to be running a Nomad client agent on some server, on some VM somewhere. But it doesn't run the tasks locally. It schedules the tasks on Fargate, ECS, Lambda, whatever, remotely. So the downside, obviously, to that approach is you still have to run Nomad clients. But the pro to that approach is, you get to keep a lot of the features and tools, available to you today, just kind of work a lot more easily without having to reinvent the world by reinventing this new kind of Nomad client. So there's a branch that exists with that kind of spike, and we're still exploring that further. It's still too early to say, which direction of any will go, or if we'll find a new direction to go. We would love any feedback from the community, any experiments from the community. It's a super interesting area, and there's just kind of trade-offs with every decision. So I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to add anything to that. But yeah, definitely expect to hear more from us in the future about this. It's something we are actively working on.
Sorry, I was just linking something for Charlie. So we're at time, but we still have questions. So I just wanted to check if Schmeichel and Chris are okay to stay and answer some more. Yeah, okay. I always like to ask just in case, because I don't know if you have other things you need to run to. And yeah, all right. Where were we?
Hey, Jackie, since we're on the topic of drivers, there was a question that came in about the CSI drivers. You mind if I ask that?
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. So this is kind of a multi-part question, and I'm going to ask it largely because I don't have context. One, what are CSI drivers? And two, are there more than just EFS plan? The user who submitted this mentioned that they're having a hard time translating all the K8's instructions to something that Nomad understands.
Yeah, so what are CSI drivers? Well, there's a couple of different things. If you think fundamentally about what CSI is trying to do, right, we want the ability to dynamically attach volumes to these tests. So you need a couple of things. First, you need to orchestrate volumes. So that's something that happens, maybe on the server scheduling side. And then the other thing is you need to actually do the fine-grained local orchestration, that is, get volumes attached into the tasks. So most of these drivers, this is why it's so complicated getting these things running. More complicated than just like turning on a feature flag, right? Is that you need a controller that is managing sort of the broader scale orchestration, but you also need these plugins that are available to do all the local stuff. So you often are going to have two different types of jobs to get run. One's the controller that says, hi, there's a new volume type. It's called EBS. And if you need to do something with it, talk to me, because I'm the EBS controller, right? CSI controller. But at the same time, you have to have something that's doing the work on the node, maybe getting these EBS volumes attached to the node and then making them available to the test. It's sort of similar to the way that the device plugins work, but it still has this global thing vis-a-vis the controller object. So that's the first issue, is actually just getting running, getting the controller up, making sure that the plugins are running on all the nodes where you're going to want to use these anyway. And unfortunately for some of these, it's still a matter of taking, because there's a lot of these out there. So we waited. Storage is hard. We waited. Storage has always been hard. If anybody using Mesos or Docker, Swarm, or Kubernetes 5, 6 years ago, it was bad then. Now we have CSI, and it's still hard. And unfortunately, a lot of these were written for Kubernetes. So there's some of these that don't really work as well with Nomad yet, or we're trying to figure out how to make them work with Nomad, and that's just going to be an ongoing thing. There's a spec, but I think some of the, I actually shouldn't say anymore, probably. I said the word spec, I should stop.
Well,
Did I miss anything, Michael?
Oh, with CSI, you can never hit everything. It's a big spec. No, I don't think you did miss anything. I think, our big concern with CSI and implementing it is that while it is not a Kubernetes specific technology, Kubernetes is definitely going to be its predominant use case. There's just no denying or getting around that. And so we're always going to kind of be playing by somebody else's rules, where the spec is actually kind of beholden to the biggest implementation. So it's going to be tough, but like Chris said, storage is tough. Like storage is always tough. So we're investing in it. We're moving forward with it. We want to engage with anybody who will engage with us about CSI. And yeah, we want to make that the best story possible. But it's just going to take continued investment for us to kind of get there. Yeah.
Yeah, and out of all fairness, by the way, there was no way that CSI providers were going to be able to make sure their plugins and controllers worked with Nomad because Nomad didn't have support for CSI. So we're out there now. We're a target that can be developed against. So I think things are only going to get better. And as to EFS, we don't. I think our support extends well beyond EFS. I, for example, have used the EBS provider. So unless that was the one that they meant, there's a number of. I don't know if we have a list yet. There was talk about making a list of all the CSI providers that we knew worked with Nomad today. So if that list, I don't know if it's been published yet, but it is a work in progress.
And just a follow-up to all this discussion, the Terraform providers team, in addition to our Terraform core, there's another one that does providers. This also has a lot of engineers actively working on getting things together. And they are also, I know we're talking Nomad CSI too, don't worry, but along with our providers teams, we also collaborate with other, providers, that's a good sentence, like Google or Amazon. And we have people from their teams also working with us to try and make sure that these are all set up and working properly. So hopefully we can kind of see more traction on this as we go forward. And as Chris said, it is a new feature, and yeah, looking forward to seeing the new developments on it.
Awesome. So this is an interesting question because we kind of run into this on the console side too. Job, group, and task names allow underscores until network stanzas are enabled. Then sometimes it complains about DNS compatibility. Is there a way we could do this verification up front? The reason that I bring this up as something we looked at in console in particular is because by using the DNS interface, you have to be able to support certain things. Maybe not supporting emojis as a host or service name, but thinking about even something as simple as an underscore to a dash, those types of validations. Is there anything more that we could be doing for that upfront?
Who is supposed to be adding that validation? Chris, was that you? Somebody.
Yeah, we're really lament. I mean, Schmeichel, talk about backwards compatibility.
So that is a double-edged sword. So no, okay. In all seriousness, the reason why Chris and I are kind of groaning about this is because, we highly prize backwards compatibility, and we really don't want to break people's job specs. And one of the most painful places that keeps coming up around this is we never restricted job names before. In fact, I think Chris, this is why I was rolling my eyes at you. You just implemented our first restriction around job names, right? The no null characters in job names, which God help you if you were putting null characters into your job names. So, basically when Nomad 0.1 was launched, they didn't do validation on job names. And that's, basically what we've lived with ever since. We have a warnings feedback mechanism that we intend to use for restricting or for informing people when they're using job names that could cause problems. And we may even take, a very slow phased approach to this where today, tomorrow, for the next 6 months, for the next 2 years, I don't know, we'll just give you a warning. But, we may actually deprecate this completely free-form job name thing in the future. But we're going to go about that slow because nobody wants to have to roll every single job in their cluster just because their name is, used a character that now we decided is invalid. So yeah, keep your eyes open for that warning showing up, maybe even in time for 1.0. That would be nice. And yeah, that's the mechanism we'll use to try to steer people toward the right path. We still will always try to keep it fairly permissive because we really don't want to make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. But in cases like, with console names, I mean, we're not helping anybody by making it permissive. We're just delaying pain and making it harder to debug. So yeah, we've got to fix that.
So on the topic of validation, another question came through, which is, are there any plans to have stricter job validation on the job submit? An example was given here where you could have a potentially invalid job, but still get a 200 back in some cases.
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is actually when we implemented task driver plugins in Nomad 09, we made life kind of hard for ourselves, and we haven't fixed that yet. And so the difficulty here is that the task config stanza within a job spec is completely defined and validated by the task driver itself. So the Nomad scheduler doesn't look at it, doesn't touch it, knows nothing about it. That works out really great because it means that, you know, your task driver plugin can be completely self-contained, can define its own schema, can define its own configuration values. You can iterate on that as much as you want, you know, super flexible. It's great. But it does mean that we can't catch errors for you until runtime, you know, until we schedule that job, we try to run it, and then something blows up because, you know, you typoed the task config stanza somehow. We have a way of fixing that. HCL2 actually has this notion of a schema that we can serialize, send up to the schedulers, and have the scheduler actually use that schema to validate the incoming values. It's pretty, you know, technically involved to implement, and it doesn't cover all cases. So it can do things like making sure a string is a string or a number is a number, but it can't do things like making sure that your task config value is one of a certain number of options. So, you know, it still is going to be limited, and there's going to be this long tail kind of improvements that we still need to make to it even after we accomplish that. So the short answer, you know, is yes. We definitely want to improve this job validation story. We definitely get bitten ourselves by it all the time, typoing things that then you find out at runtime were wrong. So we want to fix it, but it is unfortunately going to be a little more involved than something we can just quick slip into a, you know, 1.0 here before we ship.
And some things are necessarily going to be runtime. You know, I mean, we can't fix everything. If you have a bash script in your job spec, you know, we're not gonna validate that. If you have an invalid Docker image name, you know, or a Docker image that doesn't exist, you know, theoretically the scheduler could do something about that, but that's really a point in time failure. It makes sense to happen at runtime. I mean, what's a valid Docker image name at this moment in time may not be a valid Docker image in 5 minutes or in 1 second when it gets over to the client and starts running. So there's certain places where validation does make sense, and there are other places where you're just gonna, unfortunately, you're gonna have to look and see. Like, yeah, invalid config is only one of the many reasons that your job can fail to run. So you ultimately, you're still gonna have to look and see what's going on.
Yeah, and honestly, this is part of our hopes and dreams for Event Stream is to start making not just community tooling around monitoring jobs through their entire life cycle easier, you know, so that these runtime failures aren't as hard to discover and debug. But also we want to improve things like the Nomad run command itself, like the fact that the Nomad run command often exits before the job is actually running is a frustration for everybody. And we absolutely want to fix that. And the event stream would be a really nice and easy place for us to fix that. Because it kind of gives us this one place to say, tell us everything that's happening for this job. And then, you know, the Nomad run command can kind of decide what a good place to say either yes, this succeeded, or no, this failed to the user is.
It should be noted the Levant run command gives you everything you want there.
That's good. Use that until we fix Nomad run.
Plus templating.
Yes.
That sounded like use Levant and give us all of the feedback.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, yeah,
I can't wait to play with it.
That's the great thing about these ecosystem projects is, you know, once things reach Nomad core, they have to live forever. You know, we're stuck with it, and we iterate very slowly. And so things like Levant and just these other community tools are just such an excellent opportunity for us to really experiment and discover what works best, and then slowly, you know, migrate those best practices into Nomad core. You know, really Event Stream itself is that story, is learning from the community using Nomad Firehose, seeing kind of the deficiencies in Firehose caused by Nomad's architecture, and, you know, realizing we have to fix that in core. It's just, it's a great way to kind of develop things that we get to really rely on the community feedback and experience for.
I think the last question I had come in, and then we have 2 more for you. Well, 1 more for both of you. Yeah, I can, whatever, math. Just kidding. The last question we had come in was, are we thinking about implementing the create and destroy aspects of CSI?
Yeah, so I get to cheat and just tell everybody what I quick back channeled from Yishan and Tim Gross. Yishan is product manager over on Nomad. Tim Gross is an engineer who implemented a significant portion of our CSI implementation. Nomad 1.1 is when we have that scheduled for. So expect yeah, the create destroy aspects to come soon.
All right. Well, with that, we wanted to thank everyone for taking the time today. There's been a lot of really great questions. I feel like I've learned a whole lot more, and I hope our viewers have learned quite a bit. The last question that I kind of wanted to field to you both, and we'll go to Chris and then Michael, is what are some things that you want to let the community know about that are either in the pipe or happening around Nomad that you want us to be aware about?
You know, just I think everybody's probably heard of the autoscaler. I mention it every time I come on to community office hours. So just there's a lot of ecosystem stuff that's always been available around Nomad, things like Levant, which started out, you know, outside of HashiCorp, and then other, you know, autoscaler efforts that happen outside of HashiCorp. We're putting a lot of effort into continuing to grow this, but the most important thing about the ecosystem is the users, is the actual ecosystem, the actual living things outside of the Nomad team. So, you know, just give us feedback. We don't have time to work on everything. We don't have time to work on all the things that we want to work on. But just the ideas that people in the community have, the things that people want us to do, the pain points that need to be addressed, you know, just let us know about them so we can be aware of them and try to, you know, put our effort in the best place possible. We're going to continue to do that. That's what I'm excited about. That's what we're going to be. It's going to be coming up from ecosystem. It's just building on top. We have a lot of the core pieces in place now with the autoscaler, and from now on, it's just building out all of those cool features to let it do more cool things.
Awesome. And Michael?
I mean, honestly, I think the part that the thing that I would like to talk about most is you've heard us kind of talk about over and over community, you know, getting ideas from the community, getting feedback from the community. But we're still working on the best way to kind of let the community give us feedback and talk to us. So today, GitHub issues is really it. And so whether you have bugs or enhancements or even just questions, GitHub issues can be great because that is the Nomad engineers. That's what we work from. That is you know, our ticketing system, our work system is GitHub issues. But we're looking to improve that. And we're looking to not only improve the communication platforms we use, but we're hopefully even going to open up more of like our roadmap and things like that in the future. I think 1.0 in a lot of ways should be seen less as a technical achievement, more as kind of a maturity achievement for the project, where we really want to take this opportunity to acknowledge, you know, kind of this technical foundation that we've laid, and now kind of pivot our focus to really creating the most reliable scheduler that is just a joy to use, and that our community has a very active role in participating in. Because to be honest, up until this point, you know, from Nomad 0.1 to 1.0, we knew what we had to build a lot of the time. You know, you need storage, you need networking, you need service discovery, you need spread and anti-affinity, you know, all of these features that are just the table stakes for a scheduler. I think we have a lot of those now. And so the future is a little more open-ended, and the future is a little more focused on, you know, working with our users more closely, solving their workflow problems, a lot less focused on just reading whatever Borg paper, Mesos paper, or whatever, and implementing these known best practices, and working with the community to really come up to solving today's problems in the best possible way. So So yeah, I think, keep us honest, keep engaged, and yeah, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what the future holds for Nomad and just working more closely with all of our users.
I think just a +1 on Schmeichel's. Please keep the feedback coming. We want to hear it. We want to know what features you want us to be able to build so you can use. Like, we want to hear your pain points and what gaps there are that you need us to fill. So please keep this feedback coming. And we are looking at having spaces for more focused Nomad discussion with the community as well. So I can say that's something that's coming. I can't say what it is or when it'll be yet, because we're figuring that out, but it is on the roadmap. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. And Jono, do you want to wrap us up?
Absolutely. We appreciate everyone for taking the time, asking the questions. We know that there were some that we weren't able to address right out of the gate. Please feel free to post your ideas or conversations on the GitHub issues. The search bar is really helpful to find existing ones, and we're happy to get more feedback on existing issues as well as on our Discuss forums. Looking forward to joining the next Nomad event that we have coming up. But really taking the time to celebrate 1.0 has been a joy with everyone on this stream today.
I'm still so excited about that. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you so much for all of the questions and the chat engagement. And we will